The belief with UFC fans right now is that UFC 299, O'Malley versus Vera 2, is a much stronger fight card than UFC 300. I already did a rating of the entire UFC 300 card, which you could check out. But today I decided, you know what, why don't I do a UFC 299 breakdown, see if it's really as strong as people are saying. Is it as strong as UFC 300? Or, I mean, stronger in this case. I gave UFC 300, I think, an overall 6.4 out of 10. So let's see if this card is a lot better. And before I even get started, I want to say that how do I rate the fights? I usually look at, does it make sense, right? When it comes to the rankings, does it make sense? And if it doesn't make sense, is there anything else that redeems it? Star power. What about the stylistic matchup? Is it a fun fight? Stuff like that. Stuff that we as fans get excited about, right? And I won't be looking at the early prelims except for one fight. The reason why is just because the early prelims really aren't there to attract fans. It's not there to make the fight card stronger, except for maybe UFC 300, which is like a really big fight card, right? Or it's supposed to be. It's kind of there just to, when the people are getting their popcorn, they're getting their stuff, they can sit down and watch a fight going, right? They're coming into the arena. And for the it's for the hardcore of the hardcore fans who really keep up with it. So I won't be looking at that just because I think it'll lower the rating, just because they're not supposed to be that strong and all that. So, but there is one fight, because in this card there is a early prelims fight that I really do like, which is I wouldn't say I really do like, but I think it's a good matchup. Michel Pereira versus Mikhail Oleksiejczuk. I probably butchered that. 6 out of 10, which is pretty fine, like pretty good. Michel Pereira sticking to middleweight, I think it's a good move, especially after his debacle at the welterweight, where he couldn't take the fight with Wonderboy, which, if he had won, would have been a real big push for him, a real good showing, and he completely botched it, unfortunately. But it's good to see that he's moving up and he's staying at middleweight. He had a previous fight at middleweight, which he won. So it's good to see that. And it's a fun fight between two unranked guys at middleweight. Should be a decent scrap, and Michel Pereira is a decent name. Like some of his videos on YouTube have quite a bit of views because of his fighting style. So for an early prelim fight, I give it a 6 out of 10. I think it's pretty good. We move on now to the prelims. And by the way, if you're wondering, like, how am I choosing the fight order, it's based off of the UFC website. Like, whatever they have, I'm just going off of that order. We got Pedro Munoz, number 11, versus Phillips. And I gave this a 5 out of 10. I think it's fine. And let me explain why. This is one of those fights that's kind of win-win for Phillips. I mean, there's nothing really here for Pedro Munoz. He's fighting an unranked Phillips. So by beating Kyler, he doesn't go up whatsoever in the rankings. And he's number 11. He's not number 14, 15, 13. He's number 11. He's right there by number 10. And by beating Kyler, he's not going to go up the rankings. He's not going to go... He's going to stay the exact same place he is. And if he beats Phillips... also, people are going to say, well, he beat an unranked opponent. It's not that impressive. It's kind of like the Paddy Pimblett, Tony Ferguson situation all over again. Paddy said he was in a lose-lose situation. If he beat Tony Ferguson, people are going to say you beat a washed Tony Ferguson. So what? And if he lost, they would say you lost to a washed Tony Ferguson, right? For Pedro, if he beats Phillips, well, you beat an unranked guy. You get to stay where you are. And if he loses to Phillips, there goes your ranking. Like, Phillips probably is number 11, number 12, depending on how the rankings work. And Pedro drops, so he doesn't really gain much to this. With that said, Phillips is a betting favorite right now. I think minus 200 and something. So you know that people are really behind this guy. So it'll be interesting to see. I think the UFC is kind of behind Phillips as well. The fact that they're giving him this fight against Pedro, if you look at Pedro's last few fights, right, Chito Vera, Sean O'Malley, so... there's some belief in him. I think it'll be a pretty good fight, but I just think based on Pedro Munoz, it just doesn't make too much sense. It's too much of a lose-lose. But if they're trying to build Phillips, it should be a decent scrap, and in that case, it makes sense. Next, we move on to number 6, Matriz Gamrot versus number 11's Rafael dos Anjos. I give this a 7 out of 10. Two grappling heavy fighters going head-to-head. One thing that was kind of interesting was I thought Gamrot would be next in line for the belt, considering he was a backup, but then we know Volkanovski ended up being the guy who stepped up, and Gamrot's only number 6, so it doesn't really make sense for him to get a title shot now. You're going to see in the main event another guy who has a number 6, but he's getting the title shot. We'll talk about that. But I like this fight because it's two grapplers, right? Gamrot's previous fight against Fiziev was grappler versus striker, and of course there was that freak injury. Gamrot fought, what's his name? Jalen Turner, which he beat in, I think, a split decision. He lost to Beneil Dariush, so it's kind of cool to see this really two guys who rely a lot on their grappling to see maybe it'll cancel it out and they'll be stuck to the feet. And Dos Anjos, man, if you look at his fight career, the guy's a legend, the people he's fought. So it'll be kind of cool to see how this fight goes down, and I like it. It's a good matchup, and for prelims, I mean, this could easily have been maybe a fight night main event, especially when you look at what UFC has lined up. I think this would have been a great fight night main event, better than most of the ones that got announced, or maybe even like a main card pay-per-view fight, but it's only a prelim, so that kind of tells you about this fight card. So 7 out of 10. Then we got number 4 Caitlyn Chookagian versus number 6 Macy Barber. 5 out of 10. You know, it makes sense on the rankings, so not much more to say to that. Next we got number 5 Curtis Blaydes versus number 7 Jailton Almeida. I give this a 7 out of 10. Now, I feel like the UFC kind of knows what they're doing here. It's a grappler versus grappler in the heavyweight division, and they're canceling them out for the title. The winner obviously is going to go up and might be one win away from challenging for the belt. And it's interesting because when we think about the heavyweights, we don't think about the grapplers. We think about the guys with the heavy hands who are knocking each other's out. And I think it's I like this matchup because we don't want grapplers that much in the heavyweight division to dominate. The reason why is that grapplers, they don't wrestle like the guys, or heavyweight grapplers don't grapple like the lightweights, the featherweights, and in that ballpark, because they're so big, they're just going to lay on top of each other, right? And we know Almeida had that fight with Derek Lewis, which was just I didn't even watch it. I just know a lot of people didn't like it. These guys aren't the most interesting grapplers, so it feels like we're canceling them out, which I think is a good thing. Let's keep it to the guys who stand up and trade. And if you do give it to the grapplers, give it to the Tom Aspinalls, who actually make it quite interesting. One thing about this fight that does kind of concern me, I wonder if the UFC is protecting Gane. I feel like Jailton Almeida Cyril Gane was a fight to make, because Jailton Almeida is a stylistic matchup, a nightmare for Gane potentially. I know Gane previously fought a grappler, but one thing to note was the guy who he fought, whose name I can't remember, his entries and his takedowns weren't the best anyways. Again, these guys aren't really high level, whereas Almeida's got some great jiu-jitsu. So I do wonder, and the reason why I bring that up is because I'm so afraid that the UFC is going to make Aspinall versus Gane, and they're going to keep giving Gane unlimited title shots. I don't care about Gane in a title picture right now. I don't think he deserves it, and I hope that when the UFC made this fight, it was to cancel out the grapplers in heavyweight, and not so much let's protect Gane from the grappling heavy guys, right? So they're close on the rankings. It's okay, and I think Blaydes could be a problem for Almeida, so we'll see how it goes. 7 out of 10, a good fight, and especially on the prelims, I think it's a great fight. We'll move on to number 5. I think this is the first fight of the main card. Petr Yan versus Song Yadong, number 5, number 7. I give this a 9 out of 10. The reason why is, you know me, I love big implications in a fight. It's great to see Yan back, and he's going against an exciting fighter in Song Yadong. And what I mean by it's going to be high stakes is that Petr Yan is on a 4-fight losing streak. As unfortunate as that is to say, and I don't really, you know, he got disqualified against Sterling. Then he had a split decision with Sterling where he lost his entire team basically because the war broke out and they couldn't get through the border or whatever had happened. So he basically came in like that, and yet he took it to split decision. He had a split decision loss to Sean O'Malley, which I think he won, and then he had that fight with Merab. So really, out of those 4 fights, the only one where he's definitively lost was Merab, and that was a pretty bad style matchup, and even then I think he showed up injured. But either way, 4-fight losing streak, still number 5, tells you all about Petr Yan. If he loses, he's down to number 5. I mean, that's a 5-fight losing streak. I don't know, may this be his last chance? I mean, I put 3-fight losing streak. It's actually 4. I forgot about the Sterling disqualification. He could be cut, you know, and I love Yan. We all love Yan. He's got such a fun fighting style, such a fun fighter. His fights with Sean O'Malley and Corey Sandhagen are classics. His performance against Sterling in the first fight was fantastic as well. Jose Aldo, Uriah Faber. I love Yan. He's one of my favorite fighters. I hope he gets this done, but Yadong is dangerous, and which is why it's such a great fight. This is like, could Yan be cut, or does he win, and potentially we're looking at a comeback for him, and that's what I'm hoping happens. But then again, I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about how good of a fight this is in the ratings, and I'd give it a 9 out of 10. I think it'll be a really fun fight, and it's a very high stakes fight as well. So I'm glad this fight got made. I am personally, on a personal level, I am going to be rooting for Poirier. We move on to number 4, Gilbert Burns versus number 11, Jack Della Maddalena. 8 out of 10. Huge fight. Burns is a BMF. He keeps taking these difficult fights against guys lower than him, like he did with Khamzat Chimaev. Great stylistic matchup. And Jack Della Maddalena is not super well known with the casuals yet, like Gilbert Burns is. Burns is a title contender who fought for the belt, and then he had that super close fight with Chimaev. But the guys who know Maddalena, have seen him fight, know how good he is. And this is an opportunity for him to really make his name for himself. He got a win over Kevin Holland, and now he's fighting Gilbert Burns. If he wins this, man, he is maybe one more fight away from a title shot. So that's big. For Gilbert Burns, he's looking to kind of get back in there. His last fight, he got injured against Bilal Muhammad, and Bilal still took him to a decision and injured Burns. So does that tell you how bad Bilal is, or does that tell you how good Gilbert is? So we can only see. I'm interested to see if Burns takes the same approach as the Wonderboy fight and just tries to grapple him, or because JDM is a problem on the feet. He's got dynamites for hands. So, yeah, I think it's a great fight. 8 out of 10 for sure. We move on to number 13, Kevin Holland versus Michael Venom Paige. MVP, this is an 8 out of 10. I think this is a great welcome fight for Paige. So I give this a high rating because of that. I think when you look at the fights MVP could have had for introducing him to the UFC, I can't think of anything better than Kevin Holland. He's that guy who, it doesn't seem like he's that interested maybe in a belt. He's had that skirmish with the media over how he isn't too worried about it, and of course maybe that's just coping, but either way, he's kind of the guy that a lot of people know. Fans really enjoy him. He's fun to watch, and he takes these fights, and if there's any fight you want to introduce MVP, this was it, because now people are going to be interested in this. Holland is well known. Paige is well known by the hardcore. So compared to like Kayla Harrison, both of them are kind of coming from the same background, coming into the UFC. But the reason why this is more interesting is MVP is much more well liked and well known by hardcores. I think he has like YouTube videos too, shorts and stuff, which his viral moments, like they're viral. You know, he does some stuff that gets him pretty well known, and should be a great scrap either way. I'm surprised it is. According to the UFC website, it's above JDM, Burns, and Yan versus Yang Sedong. So one of these guys is ranked, one of them isn't, but it kind of tells you maybe if this is how the fight card is looking as far as the order goes, it tells you how much the UFC is kind of banking on MVP. And with his fight style and those leg kicks, it could potentially be a long night for Kevin Holland. So I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. All right, we move on to the co-main event. Number 3, Dustin Poirier versus number 11, Benoit St Denise. I'm giving this a 10 out of 10, a perfect fight. So if you guys have seen my UFC 300 breakdown, which you haven't, go check that out. I rate the entire card as well. I give this a 10 out of 10. I really do. And the reason why is, going back to the UFC 300, if you've seen that, you know I love these matchups where high-ranked veterans, these guys who have proven themselves, who fought for the belts, fight unknown up-and-comers, but who we've seen, we know how good these guys are. Benoit St Denise is number 11, but don't let it fool you. He is an extremely dangerous fighter. And I was getting sick of Poirier, even though he's one of my favorites because of his fighting style. I was getting sick of him because he wasn't taking those fights that, Justin Gaethje did with Rafael Fiziev, which was a very close fight, competitive, and it made Fiziev a bigger star, even though he lost. Then Oliveira took it with Beneil Dariush, and now he's doing it again with Arman Tsarukyan. But Poirier, I mean, I didn't know if he would ever do that, and he is, and he's doing it against Benoit St Denise, who's arguably the most dangerous out of all of those young up-and-comers who, between the Fizievs and the Tsarukyan's, St Denise might be the most dangerous. And so nothing but respect to him. Michael Chandler is going to sit and do as he's told, and he's going to wait for that McGregor fight like we know he is. He's not going to be taking these fights. He was asked about fighting Arman or Dariush, and he was like, I'm trying to fight the McGregors. Dude, it's been over a year that you fought, and it's probably going to be another year because McGregor does what he wants, and they're going to do what you're told. So I'm so thankful for Poirier for taking this fight. St Denise, very dangerous, and I also love the story. I love it when fights have these stories coming into them, right? Like Oliveira Sarukian. Sarukian knocked out Dariush quicker than Oliveira did, but Oliveira did it first. Poirier is coming off of a huge head kick KO loss, and St Denise is coming off of a huge head kick KO win. So it's kind of like it builds that, and there's that story that naturally builds with it, and it's going to be really interesting to see whether Poirier is able to bounce back. He's 34, he's taken a lot of damage in his career. St. Denise is, I think, 28, hasn't taken that much damage. He's got, 10, 11 fights, and he's been an absolute monster. So, again, another high-stakes fight. If Benoit St. Denise wins, he beats the number 3 guy. He's in that top 5, and he might be one big win away from fighting for the title. Because you got to keep in mind, there's Oliveira, Sarukian, and then there's going to be Gaethje Holloway. So the lightweight division, super exciting right now. A lot of really fun stuff going on over there. And again, high stakes, story builds itself, and the fight style, Poirier doesn't have boring fights, and Benoit St. Denise is so fun, as we saw against Matt Favola. 10 out of 10, perfect fight. Really, really, really good. Could have put this at UFC 300, and it would have been a big fight. And now we move on to the main event. The champion Sean O'Malley versus number 6 Chito Vera. I'm giving this a 9 out of 10. I think it's a really great main event. But I want to talk about some stuff first. So it's one of those fights that makes sense, but it doesn't make any sense at the same time. To start off, why it doesn't make sense. Chito Vera is number 6. A number 6 guy fighting a champion. I think Sean Strickland was number 6 as well when he fought Adesanya. But the difference was that nobody was taking that fight on short notice. DDP was hurt, and so Sean stepped up and he took it. Nobody's really hurt. They could have given it to, Merab instead, even though Merab's scheduled to fight Henry. They could have just switched Chito and Merab around. They've done stuff like that before. And Merab deserves it more. They could have done the Sterling rematch. They could have even given it to Petr Yan, even though he's number 5. Even though he's on a 4-fight losing streak, he is still above Chito Vera. So rankings wise, it doesn't make sense. It's not as bad as Michael Bisping and Dan Henderson when Dan was like number 12 and he fought, or number 10 or whatever it was. But for why it makes sense, I mean, Chito Vera is the only guy to have beaten Sean O'Malley, and it was kind of calling it a fluke might seem kind of, disrespectful. But how often does a perennial nerve leg kick end a fight? That sort of stuff is very rare, very, very rare, and it happened here. And for Sean, it's kind of like it was a fluke. For the UFC, it's like their not top star. Sean O'Malley's not a top star, but their top prospect. And I know Sean O'Malley's a champion. Why do you call him a prospect? The UFC views Sean O'Malley as their next big megastar. I don't know why. The guy can't talk on the microphone as well as a McGregor could, and he doesn't have that Brock Lesnar-esque charisma, that aura to him. So I don't think he is that next big superstar, but the UFC feels he is, and so they want him to regain that zero, right? They want him to beat Chito Vera and to prove that he is technically speaking better than him. So you can see why the UFC is doing that. And again, for the UFC, it's like, if Chito Vera ends up winning, oh well, but Chito Vera is a star in himself, and he has a large fan base. Compare that to Merab or anybody else. Sterling, if Sterling had done it. The UFC's, I feel like they're kind of okay. If either man wins, they definitely are rooting for O'Malley. But in this scenario, Chito Vera, it's not a big deal for them, even if he gets to win. And also, Corey Sandhagen is one of the guys who beat Chito Vera. Chito Vera is 1-1 in his last 2. So, and the guy who beat him was Corey Sandhagen, but Sandhagen's injured. So in that scenario, you could kind of say, okay, well, Sterling's moving up. They don't want to give it to Merab, and whatever about Merab, they're going to give it to Chito Vera instead. So in that case, it kind of makes sense. And it's a fun fight. I think it's going to be a fun fight because is O'Malley going to grapple with him? Maybe a bit, because O'Malley does know how to grapple, but I think he's going to keep it standing up. In the first fight, O'Malley was tagging him until his legs started to give out on him. And Chito Vera is one of those guys who's slow, right? He takes his time to kind of read you, and as the fight goes on in 5-round fights, I think it's going to benefit him more than it's going to benefit O'Malley. But he's never been knocked out. Chito has one of the craziest chins we've seen. So I'm really excited for the fight, even though in some ways it doesn't make sense. But like I just said, in a lot of ways it does. It's one of those weird fights. So I think it's a wonderful main event. And now that I've gotten that out of the way, I just remembered I forgot to actually tally it all up and divide it. I probably will and might put it in the comments below. But I do think this is a stronger fight card than UFC 300. I do think that the average is going to be like 7 in the 7.2, 7.3, maybe even higher. Who knows? Whether it's the strongest fight card of all time, I can't say. I don't think it's the strongest of all time. You have to kind of go back in history and look at that. But as far as recently goes, it might be one of the strongest we've seen. A very strong main event and co-main event. A really strong prelims as well, and a decent early prelims, which I didn't rate. So overall, I think it's a strong fight card. I do think it's a lot stronger than UFC 300. But 300, we still have like the main event to go, which should be announced this week. So maybe I changed my mind. But either way, what do you guys think? Do you agree? Do you disagree on any of the ratings I gave? Anything higher or lower? Any thoughts? Let me know in the comments below. And I'm going to be doing this soon for UFC 298, which is coming up. So check out for that, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.